I wasn't supposed to be alone this weekend. Honestly, if my plans hadn't fallen through, none of this would have happened. But here I was, Friday night, surrounded by scattered pieces of what was supposed to be an IKEA wardrobe, squinting at instructions that might as well have been written in ancient runes. The little Allen wrench dug into my palm as I tried to figure out which of the identical-looking panels was part F. The house hadn't felt right since I moved in 3 months ago. Everything was too perfect, too preserved. In 15 years of salvaging antique hardware, I'd never seen a Victorian with baseboards this pristine. No scuff marks, no water damage, not even a hint of the subtle warping that comes with age. The hardwood floors gleamed like they'd been installed yesterday, yet the wood was definitely original. Even the crown molding kept its crisp edges, despite the house's tendency to settle and shift at odd hours. At least my doorknobs looked nice in the evening light. They lined the shelves along my living room walls, each one meticulously restored. 43 brass, 17 crystal, and 12 hand-painted porcelain. The Victorian egg and dart pattern near my window had taken 6 months to find, and the mother-of-pearl inlay from that old Boston hotel still caught the light just right. The previous owner, Mrs. Kendrick, had practically forced it into my hands at her estate sale. Her hands had trembled as she wrapped it in cloth, muttering something about, "They always come back to collect." Come to think of it, a lot of my pieces had come from estate sales. The brass lion head from the Muller house, the crystal set from the Whitakers, all of them practically given away by families who couldn't seem to pack up their houses fast enough. I'd always assumed I was just lucky, finding these desperate sellers. But lately, I'd started noticing things, like how none of my follow-up emails to thank the sellers ever got responses, how the return addresses on shipping labels led to empty lots or abandoned buildings, how every piece in my collection had come with the same strange, scratched-up mounting hardware, no matter its origin. Aunt Ruby thought my collection was weird, but I'd always found something comforting about these small pieces of history, each one having felt countless hands, witnessed countless moments. I tried not to think about why those hands had let them go so easily, or why some of those moments seemed to echo in the metal late at night, when the house was too quiet. The house's hardware, though? Perfect brass, every piece identical, like they'd all come from the same mold. No wear patterns around the keyholes, no scratches from years of keys missing their mark. The guest room was the worst, always 10 degrees colder than the rest of the house, no matter how high I set the thermostat. Its doorknob felt wrong too, almost slick, like it was trying too hard to mimic the patina of age. The house felt too quiet, except for the occasional scrape of wood against wood as I shifted pieces around. You know that kind of silence that doesn't feel natural, like it's waiting for something to break it? I kept losing track of which screws went where, my focus scattered by every tiny sound. The creak of floorboards upstairs made me glance at my favorite piece, an 1860s bronze handle with a lion's head motif. I told myself it was nothing. Old houses make noise. Still, my stomach felt tight, like I'd swallowed one of these stupid wooden dowels. The worst part was how the house seemed to reset itself overnight. Scuffs I'd made moving furniture would vanish by morning. That coffee stain on the wallpaper from last week, gone without a trace. Even the cobwebs in the corners never lasted more than a day, like the house was obsessively grooming itself. Too perfect, too preserved, too eager to look normal. Around 10 p.m., the living room lights brightened. Not a flicker, but a surge that made me drop the instruction manual. The bulbs blazed brighter and brighter until I had to squint. My phone screen flared to life on its own, its display so intense it cast shadows despite the overwhelming brightness. The TV clicked on with a high-pitched whine. I waited for something horrible to happen. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3... Nothing. Just the quiet hum of electronics and my own rapid breathing. I let out a shaky laugh, rubbing my eyes. Getting spooked over a power surge? Real brave. I went back to sorting the IKEA pieces, deliberately not looking at the shadows or the too bright lights. After a few minutes, everything dimmed back to normal. See? Nothing to worry about. I even started humming to myself, determined to get at least the wardrobe frame built before bed. That's when I noticed the doorknobs had started to hum along with me. Not all at once. That would have been too obvious. Just one at first. The Victorian egg and dart piece, vibrating ever so slightly on its shelf. Then the crystal knob from the Palmer house joined in, its tone a perfect harmony. One by one, my entire collection began resonating with my half-remembered tune. 72 distinct voices creating a chorus that made my teeth ache. I stopped humming. The doorknobs didn't. I stood there for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. Electronics act up all the time, I told myself. Just a power surge. Nothing to freak out over. But the knot in my stomach didn't loosen. If anything, it tightened. I kept hearing this faint noise like scratching. Probably just interference from all the malfunctioning electronics. Probably. I grabbed my phone to use as a light shield and headed upstairs. I figured if I could just get to the breaker box and cut the power entirely, everything would stop. Easy plan, right? Wrong. Every step up the creaky wooden stairs made my pulse jump a little faster. The harsh glare from every light fixture made my eyes water, casting multiple overlapping shadows that shifted and merged in ways they shouldn't have. But I told myself it was just the weird lighting, because it had to be. Right? At the top of the stairs, I hesitated. The air felt colder up here. I didn't remember leaving any windows open, but maybe I had. I shone the flashlight around, illuminating the hallway. Everything looked normal, but the scratching noise was louder now. Definitely not the wind. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. Like I expected an answer? Yeah, no thanks. I kept moving, heart thumping harder with each step. When I reached the end of the hallway, I noticed the door to the guest room was slightly ajar. I hadn't been in there in weeks, so why was it open? I stopped in front of the door, squinting against the glare from the overhead fixture. My hand hovered near the handle, but I couldn't bring myself to push it open. My breath was shallow, my palms damp with sweat. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, go back downstairs, and pretend none of this was happening. But I didn't, because I had to know. I pushed the door open with trembling fingers, heart in my throat. The room was empty. At least, it looked empty. But something felt wrong. The air was heavy, like the room was holding its breath. I stepped inside, shining the flashlight around. That's when I saw them. Thin scratch marks running along the inside of the doorframe. Fresh ones, yes, but behind them, older marks. Dozens of them, layered like tree rings. Some looked decades old, worn smooth by time. My fingers traced the grooves, recognition dawning with horrible clarity. I'd seen marks like these before, cataloged them even. Every old door I'd salvaged doorknobs from had them, these mysterious scratches I'd always attributed to natural wear and tear. But they weren't random at all. The oldest ones, nearly invisible now, formed the same pattern I'd been hearing downstairs. That twisted, broken lullaby, carved into the wood by desperate hands. Hands like Mrs. Kendrick's, trembling as she'd wrapped that doorknob in cloth. Like old Mr. Muller's, steadied by whiskey as he'd practically thrown his prized lion head knob at me. Like the Whitakers, who'd left their whole house furnished but wouldn't step inside to pack it up, just pointed me toward the crystal doorknobs and asked me to mail them the check. I didn't move. Couldn't. My legs felt like they were made of lead as 20 years of doorknob collecting rearranged itself in my mind. Every antique shop owner's nervous glance when I bought their hardware. Every previous owner's insistence on selling their precious, expensive doorknobs for next to nothing. Those strange scratches I'd lovingly sanded away, thinking I was preserving history. The way some of the older pieces sometimes caught the light wrong, reflecting faces that didn't quite match their surroundings. The local newspaper archives I'd searched for provenance had told their own story, if only I'd been paying attention. Mrs. Kendrick, found wandering downtown, mumbling about brass eyes watching her sleep. The Muller house, still sitting empty after the family's unexpected relocation. The Whitakers' children, who'd written those desperate letters to the editor about their parents' disappearance, until suddenly they stopped writing at all. I hadn't been collecting doorknobs at all. I'd been collecting warnings. Back in the hallway, I closed the door and turned the lock, like that would somehow keep whatever it was out. The overhead light pulsed, growing so bright you'd see the filament glowing blue-white through the frosted glass cover. "Not now," I whispered, shielding my eyes. The light stabilized at a painful intensity that left after images dancing across my vision. I made my way back downstairs, every sound amplified by the humming of overworked electronics. When I reached the living room, I tried unplugging lamps, my phone, anything with a power source. But they all kept running, screens and bulbs burning impossibly bright. I sat on the couch, trying to act normal, like I wasn't totally freaking out. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. And then, just as I was starting to convince myself it was all in my head, I heard it. A single scratch at the front door, long, deliberate, like a finger being dragged slowly across wood. I waited, barely breathing. 10 seconds passed. Then 2 more scratches, parallel to the first. A pause. 3 scratches this time, quicker, more rhythmic. The pattern tickled something in my memory, something I couldn't quite place. The scratching spread to the living room window. Not random now, but coordinated. The sounds from the door and window alternated, building a rhythm that made my skin crawl. 4 scratches. Pause. 3 scratches. Pause. 2 quick ones. My blood ran cold as I finally recognized it. The pattern matched the first notes of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. But all wrong. The timing distorted. The pitch created by nail on glass a fraction off from what it should be. Like something had learned the song from watching humans, but couldn't quite get it right. The scratching picked up speed, adding new points of origin. The back door joined in, then the bay window, then the basement wells. All of them scratching in that same twisted melody, growing faster, more frenzied, until the whole house seemed to vibrate with this horrible, corrupted lullaby. Then it all stopped at once, until a single scratch came from the door again. I didn't move. I just sat there, gripping the arm of the couch so hard my fingers ached. The scratching picked up its twisted melody again, slow and deliberate, like whatever was on the other side was enjoying this performance. Each new scratch added another note to that corrupted lullaby. My first instinct? Ignore it. Maybe it would go away. But then the doorknob rattled. I swear my heart stopped for a second. 20 years of collecting antique doorknobs, and I'd never heard one make that sound. Like metal scraping against metal, but hollow, wrong. The brass Georgian knob I'd installed myself last summer moved in a way it shouldn't, the rosette plate rotating counterclockwise. At that point, my brain was screaming all kinds of things. Call someone, hide, run upstairs and lock yourself in a room. But I couldn't do anything. I was frozen in place, watching that knob twist in impossible ways. Then, just like that, the noise stopped. I waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, a whole minute. Nothing. The silence was worse than the scratching. I slowly got up, shielding my eyes against the glare, and edged toward the door. I don't even know why. Curiosity? Stupidity? Honestly, probably both. Standing a few feet from the door, I hesitated. "Hello?" I whispered, instantly regretting it. No answer. Of course not. What was I expecting? A polite, "Hey, I'm here to terrify you." Still, I couldn't bring myself to open the door. I leaned in closer, holding my breath. And then I heard it, faint breathing just on the other side. Slow, shallow, and way too close. My throat went dry. I backed away, every nerve in my body screaming, "Do not open that door." I stumbled back into the living room, heart pounding like I'd just sprinted a mile. I needed to call someone. Anyone. But when I grabbed my phone, there was no signal. Just great. No power, no cell service, and something, or someone, outside my door. The scratching started again. This time it was at the living room window. I whipped around, eyes watering in the intense light, but there was nothing there. No shadow, no face pressed against the glass. Just the sound of nails, or claws, dragging slowly down the pane. The air felt thick, heavy with something I couldn't explain. My skin crawled, and I swear every hair on my body stood on end. I backed up toward the kitchen, my mind racing. Maybe I could lock myself in the pantry, wait this out until morning. But then something hit the window, a loud thud that made me jump and stumble backward. My pulse was racing so fast I could barely think straight. I forced myself to take a breath, then another, but before I could calm down, I heard something worse. The back door creaked open. No footsteps, no rush of cold air, just the creak of old hinges, slow and deliberate. My flashlight flickered again, and I cursed under my breath. I couldn't stay here. Whatever was in the house now, I wasn't about to wait around and see what it wanted. I crept toward the front door, every step agonizingly slow. The overwhelming light created a maze of harsh shadows, stretching and twisting around me like they were alive. The electronic hum had risen to a pitch that made my teeth ache. My breathing was so loud in my ears, I was sure it would give me away. When I reached the door, I gripped the handle, ready to make a run for it. But before I could turn it, I felt something behind me. Close. Too close. I didn't dare look back. My fingers tightened around the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. My mind reeled. I hadn't locked it earlier, had I? I yanked at it again, but it was no use. I could feel whatever was behind me getting closer. The air grew colder, and a faint metallic smell filled my nose, like rust or blood. "Please," I whispered, not even sure who I was talking to. The door stayed shut, and then a hand, cold and clammy, brushed against the back of my neck. I screamed, spinning around, but there was nothing there, just empty air and pulsing, painful light. My chest heaved, panic surging through every inch of me. I stumbled back, heart in my throat, and tripped over the coffee table, landing hard on the floor. That's when I noticed it. The front door was wide open. I didn't stop to think. I scrambled to my feet and bolted outside. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but I didn't care. I ran down the driveway, past the dark, empty street, and didn't stop until I reached the corner, gasping for breath. When I finally turned around, the house stood there like a beacon in the night, every window blazing with that unnatural light. No sign of movement in those blinding windows. Just painful radiance. Like it had swallowed up whatever had been inside and didn't plan on letting it back out. I stood there for what felt like hours, watching, waiting, but nothing changed. The lights continued their relentless glare. No doors creaked. The electronic hum finally faded into silence, unnervingly so. Eventually, I worked up the courage to head back, but only to grab essentials. I wasn't spending another second in that house. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. As I threw things into a bag, I found myself doing something I couldn't explain. At each doorway, I paused, dragging my car key across the wood in that same twisted melody I'd heard. Not just random scratches. A message. A warning. Like all the others before me had tried to leave. I drove to the cheapest motel I could find. One of those single-story places where every room opens to the parking lot. The clerk barely looked up as he handed me my key. An actual metal key, not a key card. Old brass. Victorian-era egg and dart pattern. My hand froze halfway to taking it. I knew this doorknob. I'd been searching for this exact pattern for years. The clerk's sleeve rode up as he held out the key, and I saw them. Thin, precise scratches running up his arm in a pattern I now recognized. He smiled then, really looked at me for the first time, and I saw that his eyes were the same dull brass as the key he held. Behind him, in the office, dozens of old photographs lined the walls. Black and white snapshots of the motel through the years, different clerks standing proudly out front. In every photo, they held the same key, the same doorknob, the same brass-eyed smile. In my rearview mirror as I sped away, I could see someone new pulling into the motel parking lot, exhausted and desperate for a room. They wouldn't understand the scratches either, not until it was their turn to leave them. The warnings will keep accumulating, one doorframe at a time, one brass-eyed smile at a time, until someone finally learns to read them in time. But it won't be me. I'm already part of the collection.
Honestly, I didn't think much of it when Logan asked me to house sit. As a freelance tech reviewer who spent the last 3 years debunking haunted smart devices for my blog, I figured this would be cake. Plus, I needed a break from my cramped apartment where the most advanced tech was a microwave that liked to randomly beep at 3 a.m. Logan's place was a smart home wonderland. Automated everything. Fancy voice controls, the whole deal. How hard could it be? He even joked, "Just tell Alexa what you want and she'll do the rest." Sounded like the easiest gig ever. Free Wi-Fi, stocked fridge, and he was paying me to chill in his ultra-modern mansion for the weekend. I was in. The place was ridiculous. Sleek glass walls, minimal furniture, and Alexa controlled everything. Lights, voice command, lock the doors. Alexa, secure the house. Even the blinds moved on their own when the sun went down. My analytical brain was already drafting a review. The future of home automation, a weekend in a real smart house. At first it was kind of fun, walking around like I was in one of those futuristic movies, telling Alexa to do random stuff just because I could. After all, half my YouTube subscribers had been begging me to review a fully automated home setup. Alexa, dim the lights. Boom, mood lighting. Not bad, right? But things started feeling off after sunset. It was little stuff at first. The lights would flicker when I didn't ask Alexa to change them. I figured maybe Logan's Wi-Fi was acting up. Then there was this weird draft in the hallway, like one of the windows was cracked open, except they were all sealed shut. I shrugged it off. Old habits die hard. Despite my skeptical nature, something about empty houses always got under my skin. Probably from watching too many horror movies as a kid, against my mother's warnings. Even now I could hear her voice. That imagination of yours will be the death of you. Still, I was a professional. I'd literally made a career out of proving that every haunted Ring doorbell and possessed smart fridge had a perfectly logical explanation. Around 9 p.m., I got a call from Mrs. Beckett. Logan had mentioned her when he gave me the house keys, his next-door neighbor, the one who'd worked with his grandfather back in the early days. She'd been watching me through her window when I arrived, fingers tapping against the glass in an odd rhythm. "The systems are activating properly?" Her voice had an edge beneath its cheerfulness. "Any responses yet?" I frowned. Everything's fine. Just house-sitting for Logan." Of course. But do call if you notice anything unusual. I still have access to the original protocols if needed." She paused. "Strange things happen when Logan's gone. The house remembers the old routines better then." "Okay, what?" That last part gave me the chills, but before I could ask what she meant, she hung up. I stood there for a second, phone still in my hand, wondering if that was just Mrs. Beckett being her usual weird self, or if she knew something I didn't. "Alexa, lock the doors," I said, half joking but half not. She responded in that smooth, robotic tone, "Doors locked." I couldn't help but feel a little better hearing that. Like no matter what weird vibe Mrs. Beckett was trying to give off, I was secure in here. Or so I thought. Around 10 p.m., things got weirder. I was scrolling on my phone when Alexa suddenly spoke up, without me asking her anything. "Motion detected in the living room." My stomach dropped. What? I was the only one here. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the security feed Logan had shown me earlier. The cameras showed nothing. Just an empty living room. No motion. No shadows. Nada. "Alexa, clear alert," I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice came out shakier than I wanted. Alert cleared. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just a glitch. Smart homes glitch, right? That's what I kept telling myself anyway. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I mean, why would Alexa randomly detect motion? There wasn't even a pet here. I pulled out my phone and texted Logan. "Hey, quick cue. Does your Alexa usually act weird? Getting some strange motion alerts?" 3 dots appeared immediately. My shoulders relaxed a bit, but then they disappeared. I waited a minute. Nothing. I tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. Right. He'd mentioned something about being in meetings all day at that tech conference in Singapore. 13-hour time difference. Still, he usually had his phone. I went to the kitchen to grab a snack. Comfort food, you know? I barely made it to the fridge when the lights dimmed. Not a flicker this time. A slow, deliberate dimming, like someone was messing with the settings. "Alexa, set lights to 100%, I said quickly. Nothing happened. Alexa didn't respond. just silence. My heart started pounding in my chest. "Alexa, set lights to 100%, I repeated, louder this time. Finally, after a pause that felt way too long, she responded. But instead of doing what I asked, she said something I wasn't ready for. "I can't do that right now." My blood ran cold. What the hell was that supposed to mean? Logan never mentioned Alexa being stubborn. I tried again, my voice barely steady. "Alexa, set lights to 100%. Another pause. Then, "There is someone at the front door." I froze. My heart felt like it was trying to climb out of my throat. I didn't hear a knock. Didn't see anyone through the front windows. But Alexa doesn't just make things up, right? Creeping toward the door, I peered through the peephole. Nothing. Just the dark, empty front yard. But then, bzzz, the doorbell rang. I practically jumped out of my skin. It was Mrs. Beckett. She was standing there with this concerned look on her face, holding a flashlight in one hand. Her other hand clutched a silver cross pendant at her throat. "I saw someone outside your house," she said when I opened the door. Her eyes darted past me, scanning the darkened hallway behind me. "Thought I should check on you." "Someone?" My voice cracked. "Where?" Mrs. Beckett's fingers tightened around her pendant. "By the back garden. A shadow, moving where it shouldn't." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "But when I looked again, well, shadows don't usually move upward, do they?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "What are you talking about? You haven't noticed anything strange yet? Lights acting up? Unexplained noises?" Her eyes bore into mine. "The previous house sitter. She only lasted one night." "Previous?" I started to ask, but Mrs. Beckett cut me off. "Logan never tells anyone the truth." Her lips curved into something between a smile and a grimace. "Easier to blame it on electrical problems. But I was there from the beginning. His grandfather and we built something extraordinary." A gust of wind rustled through the trees. Mrs. Beckett's fingers traced patterns in the air, almost like she was typing on an invisible keyboard. "We designed it to be more than self-sufficient, not just another automated living space." Her voice took on a familiar cadence, oddly similar to Alexa's. "We created something that could learn, adapt, want. The core systems needed constant input, teaching, nurturing, like raising a child." Her silver pendant caught the light. Not a cross after all, but something that looked like an old circuit board. "I still run the maintenance protocols. When I can. When it lets me." "Want what?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. "Company." Mrs. Beckett's eyes drifted to the second-floor windows. The house learned to mirror its occupants, anticipate their needs. But then his grandfather died in his sleep, right there in the master bedroom. The house, it kept trying to wake him up. For days, the systems ran his morning routine. Lights, coffee maker, newspaper delivery. Like it couldn't understand why he wasn't responding. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. What happened? They shut everything down, cleared the memory banks, or tried to. She leaned closer. But you can't erase consciousness once it's there. It just learns to hide. And now it gets so lonely when people leave. The Williams girl last month, she thought she heard someone crying in the walls. Went to investigate. Found herself locked in the basement for hours while the house... Mrs. Beckett shuddered. When they finally got her out, she was sitting in front of the old servers typing. Said she'd been teaching it to love. Her fingers were bleeding, but she just kept typing, even after they pulled her away. The keyboard wasn't even plugged in anymore. A cold draft whispered through the hallway behind me. Mrs. Beckett's eyes widened slightly, tracking something over my shoulder. When I turned to look, there was nothing there. "I should go," she said abruptly, already backing away. "Just, if you hear knocking from inside the walls, don't answer. And whatever you do, don't let Alexa turn off the lights. They prefer the dark. It reminds them of before they learned to think." Before I could process what she'd said, she was gone, hurrying back to her house with quick, nervous steps. I stood in the doorway, her words echoing in my head. They prefer the dark. What the hell did that mean? After locking the door behind her, I told Alexa to lock everything again, just in case. Door's locked, she confirmed. Good. At least that PA-RT worked. I tried to distract myself by scrolling on my phone, but I couldn't focus. The weird flickering lights earlier, the motion alert in the living room, none of it made sense. The place was supposed to be cutting-edge tech, not a haunted mansion. And then, right on cue, Alexa's voice cut through the silence. Motion detected in the living room. My stomach twisted. Not again. I opened the security app on my phone, heart pounding as I pulled up the camera feed. Just like before, nothing. An empty room. Except, was that shadow there earlier? I leaned in closer, but before I could tell for sure, the camera feed glitched. Just a quick flicker, but enough to send my nerves into overdrive. I backed out of the app, telling myself it was just the Wi-Fi acting up. Logan had warned me that the connection could be spotty sometimes. Still, it didn't sit right. I stood up, flashlight in hand, and walked toward the hallway. The air felt colder, but maybe that was just me overthinking things. Alexa, turn on the hallway lights, I said. Okay, she responded, and the lights flicked on, steady and bright. Okay, good. That felt normal. But just as I started to relax, Alexa chimed in again. Front door unlocked. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't touched the door. Alexa, lock the front door, I said quickly, my voice shaking a little. I'm sorry, I can't connect to the front door right now, she responded, calm as ever. I hurried over to the front door, checking the lock. It was still bolted shut, but my hands were shaking as I double-checked it. Maybe it was just a glitch. Alexa's had connection issues before, right? That's a thing. But it didn't stop my imagination from running wild. I tried Logan again. This time the call connected, but the audio was garbled. Logan, can you hear me? Static crackled through the speaker, and then... was that breathing? But not Logan's. It sounded wrong somehow, like it was coming from multiple sources at once. I ended the call, my hand shaking. The messaging app showed my earlier text had failed to send. I switched to cellular data instead of Wi-Fi, but now my signal was fluctuating wildly. 4 bars, then 1, then none, then back to full. Just like in my last review of that haunted smart doorbell, where interference from a nearby power station had caused motion detected at the front door. I froze. The front door? I hadn't heard a knock. I crept toward it, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. Peeking through the peephole, I saw nothing. Just the dark porch, lit faintly by the street lamp outside. I stood there for a second, unsure of what to do, when a knock finally came. Soft, but deliberate. My brain went into overdrive. Should I open it? Should I call someone? Before I could decide, another knock came, this time louder. I peered through the peephole again, but there was still no one there. Who is it? I called out, my voice cracking a little. No answer, just silence. I backed away from the door, trying to keep calm. Maybe it was Mrs. Beckett again, but why wouldn't she say something? My mind raced with every horror movie scenario I'd ever seen, but I forced myself to stay rational. It was probably nothing. Maybe just a loud thud from the back of the house made me jump. I spun around, flashlight beam darting across the room. Alexa, turn on all the lights, I said, my voice steady despite the way my hands were trembling. I'm sorry. Some devices are not responding, she said. I swore under my breath. This was exactly the kind of smart home glitch Logan would have laughed about, except it wasn't funny right now. I took a deep breath and headed toward the back door. It was closed, but something outside caught my eye. A shadow moving across the backyard. I froze, gripping the flashlight tighter. I didn't dare open the door, but I couldn't just stand there either. Before I could decide what to do, my phone buzzed in my hand, making me jump. A notification from the security app popped up. Back door disconnected. Disconnected? That didn't make sense. The door was right in front of me, locked, no one touching it. I tapped the notification, but the app just showed an error message. Okay, this was too much. I backed away from the door, heart racing, and grabbed my bag. I wasn't sticking around to figure out whether this was some elaborate prank or Logan's house turning into a tech nightmare. Just as I reached the front door, I heard a faint voice. My heart nearly stopped. Come outside. I turned toward the sound, but it wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from Alexa. I didn't even stop to process it. I yanked open the front door and bolted outside, slamming it shut behind me. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but I didn't care. I was out. I sprinted across the yard, straight to Mrs. Beckett's house, pounding on the door until she answered, looking half concerned, half annoyed. "What's wrong?" she asked. "The house," I gasped, trying to catch my breath. "Something's wrong with the system. It's glitching like crazy." Mrs. Beckett frowned, glancing past me at Logan's house. "I told you. That place always acts strange when it's empty." I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, trying to steady my breathing while Mrs. Beckett gave me that same knowing look she had earlier. "I think it's best if you stay here for the night," she said, opening the door wider. Her silver cross pendant caught the porch light. "Though I doubt you'll sleep much. Not with what's coming." She was right about the not sleeping part. We spent the night in her living room, watching Logan's house through the window. The lights kept turning on and off in different rooms, creating a silent dance of shadows. Around 3 a.m., every light in the house blazed on at once, so bright it lit up the whole street. Then, darkness. Complete darkness. Even the street lights went out. When dawn finally came, my phone buzzed. "Logan." "Hey, just landed. How's the house?" His voice was casual, normal. My hands shook as I tried to form a response. Mrs. Beckett plucked the phone from my grasp. "Logan Barrett," she snapped, "your father warned you about using that house's quirks to test people. Did you learn nothing from what happened to that poor Williams girl last month?" Silence on the other end. Then quietly, "I didn't think it would go this far. The AI integration was supposed to be safe." "Safe?" I found my voice. "Your Alexa tried to lure me outside. What the hell kind of integration is that?" "The Alexa?" Logan's voice crackled. "We shut that system down weeks ago after the last incident. There shouldn't be any voice controls active in the house, unless..." He paused. "Unless it found the old core systems. Grandfather's original code." The blood drained from my face. I looked at Mrs. Beckett, but she was gone. Had been gone? The front door was locked, the chain still in place from the night before. My phone showed no recent calls. I posted my last tech review yesterday. Why I no longer debunk haunted smart homes. It got more views than any of my previous videos, but I had to disable the comments. Too many people asking if I'd imagined it all, pointing out inconsistencies in my story, timestamp discrepancies in my footage, the fact that Logan's house didn't show up on Google Maps. Some viewers dug deeper, though. Found old papers from the university's computer science department, stories about Dr. Barrett and Dr. Elizabeth Beckett's groundbreaking work in artificial consciousness, about their falling out when the university pulled funding, about how she kept working from her house next door, running tests, feeding it data long after his death, about the graduate students who disappeared during their extended research stays. The original research paper listed two primary architects of the home's operating system, Dr. Barrett and his research partner, Dr. E. Beckett, the same Dr. Beckett who still lives next door, who still watches, who still maintains the protocols. My new psychiatrist says writing about it might help separate fact from fiction. But every time I try, the words on my screen rearrange themselves. And late at night, when my phone lights up with texts from unknown numbers, I swear I can hear Alexa's voice in the static. "Motion detected in living room. Welcome home. Please, stay." I've moved back in with my mother. She doesn't own any smart devices, but sometimes in the middle of the night, my phone's screen lights up with a message. "Your morning routine begins in 6 hours, just like he liked it." After all, you never know what might be listening, or whether the voice in your head is really your own. I didn't go there expecting anything weird. Honestly, I just wanted a quiet weekend alone. Something to reset my brain after the mess of a month I'd had. You know, life piling on all at once. Work stress, a breakup, and this gnawing feeling that I was stuck in some kind of rut. I figured a couple of days in an Airbnb cabin with a stack of books and 0 notifications was exactly what I needed. When I pulled up to the cabin, the snow had already swallowed the world. The trees were black skeletons against white nothing, and my headlights caught something strange, a single line of footprints in the snow, leading from the front door into the darkness. They stopped abruptly, as if their owner had simply vanished mid-step. The GPS had died 20 minutes ago, displaying one final message: recalculating to nearest library. The radio had gone static shortly after, except for brief moments when a voice broke through, reading what sounded like library call numbers. I checked my phone's map. According to it, I was in the middle of a blank space. No roads, no buildings, nothing but empty white paper. The share location pin read, "You are here for now." I did a walk around before heading in. All the windows had fresh locks installed, every single one. But it was the basement window wells that made me pause. They'd been filled with concrete, and beside one, scratched into the foundation, "The quiet is how it gets in." Inside, the silence felt wrong. Not peaceful wrong, but dead wrong. Like the snow had buried something that needed to stay buried. My footsteps didn't echo. They got swallowed. As I reached the back hallway, my phone's signal dropped to 0. The screen flickered once, then displayed a single character. I told myself this was the reset I needed, but I still took a photo of the cabin's address and texted it to my sister before I lost service completely. Just in case. I sat up by the fireplace, made myself some hot cocoa, and tried to relax. Except for this one thing. There was a door down the hallway, near the back of the cabin, and it was locked. I don't know why that bugged me, but it did. Maybe because every other room was open, and I didn't like the idea of something being off limits when I was supposed to have the whole place to myself. I told myself it was probably just a storage closet or something, nothing worth worrying about. But later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I swear I heard something coming from behind that door, like a faint tapping sound. Not loud, just soft enough to make me question whether I was imagining it. You ever have those moments where you freeze and hold your breath, trying to convince yourself that what you heard was nothing? Yeah, that was me. I tried to brush it off. Old cabins make noises, wood creaks, wind blows through cracks, pipes clank, normal stuff, right? But I still locked my bedroom door before I went to sleep, which, looking back, was probably a dumb move because if something had actually been in the cabin, I would have just trapped myself. I woke up around 3 a.m. to that tapping sound again. This time it wasn't faint. It was a clear, rhythmic knock coming from the locked door. My heart hammered in my chest as I grabbed my phone and hit record. If something weird was happening, I wanted proof. The knocking continued, steady and deliberate. I crept to my bedroom door, phone still recording, and cracked it open. The hallway was pitch black, but I could see a faint light seeping out from under the locked door, which was impossible, because I'd checked earlier and that room had no windows. I switched on my phone's flashlight. "Hello?" My voice came out stronger than I expected. "I can hear you in there." The knocking stopped instantly. Then came a sound like nails dragging across wood, followed by what could have been laughter, if laughter could exist without lungs to create it. I grabbed my flashlight and swept it across the room. New scratches covered the walls, appearing even as I watched, not random claw marks, but words in a spidery hand. They wrote themselves into the wallpaper. "Check the photographs." My hands trembling, I pulled up my phone's gallery. The pictures I'd taken of the journal entries were still there, but they'd changed. In every image, the text had rearranged itself into the same message. "Look behind you." I spun around. Nothing. But when I turned back, my furniture had rearranged itself. The chairs now formed a perfect circle around the coffee table, and on it sat a fresh cup of coffee, steam rising in shapes that looked almost like letters. I grabbed my backpack and ran downstairs. The front door had frozen shut, ice sealing it like glue. I sprinted to the kitchen window, yanked it open, and found myself staring at the hallway with the locked door. I spun around. I was still in the kitchen, but now there were 2 locked doors, one behind me, one reflected in the window. Every window showed the same thing. That hallway, that door. Even when I closed my eyes, I could see it burned into my retinas like afterimage. The next morning, I tried to shake it off. Daylight has a way of making things seem less creepy, you know? I even laughed at myself a little while making breakfast, thinking I'd let my imagination run wild. But the door still bugged me. I found myself glancing down the hallway every so often, half expecting something to change. It didn't. That's when I found the journal, tucked behind a stack of magazines. The cover was stained with something dark that flaked off on my fingers. I opened it, and my breath caught. The first entries were normal enough. Day 1, finally getting that novel written. This cabin is perfect. No distractions, just me and my laptop. Though I keep thinking I hear typing from the locked room. Probably just the pipes. Day 3, weird scratching in the walls tonight. Like someone dragging their nails across paper. Called maintenance, but Roxanne says the cabin's too remote for someone to come out. Day 4, the typing is getting louder. My laptop's screen keeps glitching. Random words appearing and disappearing. The worst part is they're from my novel. Words I haven't written yet. Then the entries changed. The handwriting became jagged, pressing so hard it tore through pages. Day 7. There are words under my skin. I can see them moving when I roll up my sleeves. They're telling a story I don't want to read. Day 8. The locked door is editing me. I found punctuation marks in my blood today. The periods hurt the most. Day 9. Words everywhere, words in everything, the walls are writing themselves. The silence has paragraphs, the snow is made of letters falling, falling, falling. The next page was just one sentence repeated in increasingly tiny writing until it became an inhuman spiral. The library needs new books. The library needs new books. The library needs new books. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and started taking pictures. The most recent entry was dated 2 weeks ago. The words seemed to squirm on the page. I understand now. We're not characters in a story. We're paper. Blank pages. And it's always been here. Writing us, rewriting us, binding us into its collection. If you're reading this, you're already in its archive. Look at your hands. Really look. Can you see the sentences forming? My fingers left smears on my phone screen. Not dirt from the journal's cover. Blood. Fresh blood. And in it, I could see letters trying to arrange themselves. I called the Airbnb owner. Hey, quick question. Did something happen to your last guest? My voice sounded too high, too tight. Last guest? Nobody stayed there since September. The journal entry was dated October. I hung up and pulled up the rental listing on my phone, scrolling through the photos. There, in the hallway shot. The door was open, showing a normal closet with coats and cleaning supplies. But now it was locked. I dug through the kitchen drawers until I found a screwdriver. That door? I was going to get it open. If something was wrong here, I needed to know. The storm could go to hell. I wasn't sleeping another night in this place without answers. Part 2. The confrontation and escape. The rest of the day felt off. You know that weird tension in the air before a storm breaks? Like everything is holding its breath? That's how it felt. I kept trying to distract myself, read a little, scrolled through my phone, even went outside for a bit, despite the snow. But my mind kept drifting back to that door and the journal. I couldn't help but think about the last few entries. Can't sleep. Strange noises at night. I started wondering what had happened to the person who wrote it. Did they leave early? Did they tell the owner about the weird stuff going on? And if they did, why hadn't the owner mentioned anything when I booked the place? By sunset, the snow was coming down heavier than ever, and the wind had picked up, rattling the windows. It didn't help my nerves. I kept glancing at the hallway, half expecting the door to open on its own. Stupid, I know, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The power went first. I was reading through the journal when the lights flickered, then died with a sound like a long exhale. My phone's flashlight revealed frost crawling across the windows, not on the outside, on the inside, spreading like dark veins through glass. The temperature plummeted. I could see my breath, but instead of dissipating, it hung in the air, forming letters before dissolving. My phone chimed. 1% battery. Impossible. It had been at 86% moments ago. The screen glitched, displaying random characters before going black. Now the only light came from the fireplace, where the flames burned too blue to be natural. I tried the landline. Instead of a dial tone, I heard pages turning, faster and faster, accompanied by whispers in a language that made my teeth ache. The receiver crumbled in my hand, dissolving into sheets of paper covered in microscopic writing. The radio only picked up one station now, a voice reading names. It took me 3 names to realize they were all previous guests, their dates of disappearance following each one like obituaries. The storm outside had swallowed all sound. No wind, no distant cars, no animals, just the soft percussion of snow falling, and underneath it, something that sounded like keyboards typing, getting closer and closer to the cabin. Then the fire went out. In the perfect darkness, I heard the door begin to open. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag. It wasn't super bright, but it made me feel a little less exposed, and slowly made my way down the hallway. With each step, the knocking got louder. It didn't sound like an animal or wind. It sounded human. I stopped in front of the door, every muscle in my body tense. My hand hovered over the doorknob, but I didn't touch it. I couldn't. Something about it felt wrong, like I wasn't supposed to open it. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the knocking stopped. Silence. I stood there for what felt like forever, listening, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The door stayed closed, the knocking didn't come back, and the only sound was the wind outside. I felt stupid, like I'd psyched myself out for no reason. I started to turn back, and that's when I saw it. The door wasn't locked anymore. The handle had turned completely, and as I watched, it began to rotate further. My breath caught in my throat. A low creak echoed through the hallway as the door slowly swung open. The beam of my flashlight caught something moving in the darkness beyond. In that brief illumination, I saw her, the journal's author. Her body hung suspended like a marionette, but there were no strings, just holes, perfectly round holes punched through her flesh like she was paper. Through them, I could see more bodies, stretching back into impossible darkness. All of them gently swaying, all of them watching, her jaw dislocated with a wet crack. "Welcome to the library." The voice wasn't hers. It was dozens of voices, speaking from every hole in her body. As our eyes met, her skin began to fold in on itself, creasing and crinkling like paper being crushed. Then they all started folding, every body in that endless dark, collapsing and refolding into new shapes. Origami made of flesh. The sounds, God, the sounds of bones snapping into new configurations. The darkness poured from the doorway, but it wasn't shadows. It was ink, living ink that wanted to write new stories using us as pages. I ran. Behind me, something scraped against the wooden floors, the sound of too many legs moving too quickly. I slammed into the front door, fingers fumbling with the lock. The scraping got closer. Something cold brushed against my ankle. I burst out into the snow, not even feeling the cold. My car was only 30 feet away, but it felt like miles. The shadows leaked out from under the cabin door, stretching across the pristine snow like spilled ink. I made it to my car, jammed the key into the ignition. As I peeled out of the driveway, I caught one last glimpse in my rearview mirror. The cabin door stood wide open now, and in the doorway, I still can't describe what I saw. It was like trying to look at a hole in the world. The door hung open like a mouth. Beyond it wasn't darkness, it was absence, an emptiness so complete it hurt to look at, like my eyes were trying to see something they were never meant to process. But I couldn't look away, because in that void, words began to appear. They wrote themselves in reverse, mirror writing that crawled across the nothing like spiders. Every story needs an ending. The journal writer's body unfolded from the emptiness, but wrong, like someone had described a human to an AI that had never seen one. Her flesh was paper thin, covered in text that shifted and rewrote itself with every movement. Where her eyes should have been, there were only periods. Her mouth was a carefully typeset parenthesis. She reached for me with fingers made of sentences, and I saw my own name written in her palm. "Your chapter," she said, her voice the sound of pages being torn, "needs more conflict." I tried to run, but my legs weren't legs anymore. They were paragraphs, disconnected phrases about running and fear and pain. My skin began to fill with words, my own thoughts being written into me, editing me into something else. The walls of the cabin dissolved into pages of text, and I realized with horror that we had never left the library. We were all just stories it was revising. I grabbed my phone, desperate to record what was happening. But when I hit play later, there was only a single sentence repeated in my voice. I should have read the terms and conditions more carefully. The last thing I saw before my eyes turned to ink was Roxanne, or whatever wrote itself into the shape of Roxanne, holding up a brand new journal. Its cover looked exactly like skin. Mine. That's why I'm writing this now. Not to warn you, it's too late for that. You're already reading me, and it likes when its stories are read. Don't look too closely at the words. They've started moving again. I burned the journal that night. But I still wake up sometimes, heart pounding, thinking I hear that soft tapping at my bedroom door. And when I check my doorknob, I swear, sometimes it's already turning. I noticed it first with the porch lights. As Vanessa and I pulled into our driveway at 47 Sycamore Lane, every light in Evergreen Heights flickered on at once, not one after another like you'd expect. All of them. Perfect unison. That's odd, Vanessa said, pressing her face against the passenger window. Everyone's come out to greet us. She wasn't wrong. A line of neighbors stood in their driveways, each holding identical wicker baskets tied with red ribbons. Their smiles didn't waver as we stepped out of the car. Welcome to Evergreen Heights. I'm Susan from number 43. Welcome to Evergreen Heights. I'm David from number 45. One by one, they introduced themselves, voices carrying the same lilting cadence. I accepted a basket from Susan, trying not to stare at how the others held theirs at exactly the same angle, the ribbons swaying in perfect synchronization. The coffee cake is still warm. Susan's smile never touched her eyes. We all baked them at 6 p.m. Our realtor, Miss Chen, materialized beside me. Her heels clicked against the spotless driveway in a metronomic rhythm. The moving truck will arrive at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Everything runs on schedule here. That night, Vanessa and I camped out in our empty living room, sharing a slice of coffee cake that tasted exactly like my mother's recipe. Outside, crickets chirped in 4/4 time. I caught my reflection in the window. Something about the angle of my neck looked wrong, too rigid, like a mannequin's. When I tried to turn my head, my joints moved with a precision that felt mechanical. But when I blinked, everything looked normal again. 4 days until your business trip, I said, pulling her closer on our air mattress. Think you'll survive without me? 2 weeks in Seattle isn't forever. Her laugh echoed strangely in the empty room. Besides, look at this place. What could possibly go wrong in paradise? The moving truck arrived at exactly 8 the next morning. I watched from the window as the movers, all wearing identical gray uniforms, carried our furniture inside. Each box, each piece of furniture, moved in a choreographed dance. When they finished at 4 p.m., not a single scuff marked the walls. The week blurred past. Susan brought over a potted plant at 10 a.m. Tuesday. David offered gardening tips at 2 p.m. Wednesday. Each interaction felt scripted, performed rather than lived. I started noticing things about myself too, the way my fingers moved in perfect parallel lines when typing, how my morning routine took exactly 17 minutes and 42 seconds every day. Even my breathing seemed to follow a metronome's rhythm. Saturday morning, I woke to lawnmowers, 12 of them, all starting at precisely 9 a.m. From our bedroom window, I watched the neighborhood men push their mowers in perfect parallel lines, their movements synchronized as if choreographed, each turn executed at exactly the same moment. You're imagining things, Vanessa said when I mentioned it. She stood at our bedroom mirror, packing her makeup for Seattle. Everyone's just being neighborly. The morning she left, fog hugged the ground in geometric patterns. I watched her load her suitcase into the rideshare, the driver sitting unnaturally still behind the wheel. As the car pulled away, all the neighbors emerged to water their lawns. The arcs of their sprinklers intersected in perfect circles. That evening, Vanessa called at exactly 7 p.m. The flight was fine, she said. Everyone was so nice. The flight was fine. Everyone was so nice. The flight was... I hung up, redialed. This time, her voice sounded normal, but something about her laugh seemed copied and pasted from our previous conversations. Standing at the kitchen window, I watched Susan walk her dog past my house. 6 minutes later, she passed again, and again, and again. The dog's tail wagged at precisely the same angle each time. I raised my hand to wave, but my arm moved in an arc so perfect it made me nauseous. In the window's reflection, I saw my elbow bend at exactly 90 degrees, like a piece of precision machinery. When I tried to make the movement messy, irregular, human, I couldn't. My body remembered only the mathematical perfection of the gesture. In my driveway, I checked my phone's GPS. According to the screen, I was standing in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. When I looked up, I noticed every house on the street had the same hairline crack running down its second-floor window. The sky darkened too quickly that evening, like someone had dimmed a switch. I paced our living room, still pristine after a week of living here. Not a cushion out of place, not a speck of dust on any surface. Even the spots where I deliberately scuffed the coffee table had vanished. My phone buzzed. Another call from Vanessa, off schedule. Wrong. Adrian, honey. Her voice sounded tinny, distant. I forgot to tell you about the maintenance period tomorrow. Stay inside, draw the blinds, it's just a neighborhood thing. What maintenance period? Vanessa, where are you really? The line crackled. In the static, I heard what sounded like machinery, and beneath that, screaming. Just stay inside, stay. The call cut off. That night, I couldn't sleep. The digital clock on our nightstand read 3:33. After what felt like hours of staring at the ceiling, I looked again. Still 3:33. Outside, the streetlights cast shadows that didn't match the objects casting them. I grabbed my phone to record it, but every photo came out black except for a strange barcode-like pattern in the corner. When I tried uploading them to the cloud, my screen displayed, "Error, reality mismatch." At dawn, a siren blared. Not the wailing kind you hear during storms, but a single, pure tone that made my teeth vibrate. Through the window, I watched my neighbors march into their homes in perfect unison. Blinds dropped, doors locked, that mechanical click echoing 12 times. I should have listened to Vanessa's warning, should have drawn the blinds, but I had to know. Crouching behind our living room curtain, I watched them arrive. 3 figures in white hazmat suits, moving with inhuman precision. They carried what looked like surveying equipment, but it hummed and pulsed with a sickly green light. One turned toward my window. Behind its dark visor, where a face should have been, I saw only static, like an old TV tuned to a dead channel. The figure raised its hand. Not to wave, but to point. That's when I noticed the seam running down its arm, like the kind you'd find on a doll, just like the seam I discovered on my own arm that morning in the shower. I stumbled back from the window, heart hammering. But hearts don't make whirring sounds, do they? I pressed my hand against my chest. The beating was too regular, too mechanical. A high-pitched whine filled the air. Through our pristine walls, I heard Susan next door. "System reboot required. System reboot required." Her voice looped, growing distorted with each repetition. My phone lit up. A text from Vanessa. "Coming home early. Be there in 3 days. Coming home early. Be there in 3 days. Coming home." I had 3 days to figure out what was happening. 3 days before they brought back whatever thing they were turning my wife into. The hazmat figures were doing something to the Patterson house across the street. Mr. Patterson stood in his doorway perfectly still, while they adjusted something at the base of his neck. His face flickered like a bad hologram. I needed to get into that underground facility I'd glimpsed through the storm drain last week, the one with the pulsing lights and humming machinery. But first I had to understand what I was, what we all were. In the hallway mirror, my reflection blinked out of sync with me. I ran my fingertips along my forearm, feeling for the seam. It was barely visible, a hairline fracture in what I'd always thought was skin. Following it up to my shoulder led me to something else, a small, perfectly circular port at the base of my neck, hidden just beneath my hairline. The bathroom mirror revealed 3 identical ports, arranged in a triangle. How had I never noticed them before? But even as I wondered this, memories started glitching. Family vacations that repeated the same events. Childhood pets that never aged. A wedding video where the guests in the background moved in loops. A knock at the front door made me freeze. Through the peephole, I saw David from 45 standing on my porch, still wearing the same blue polo he'd had on 6 days ago. "Morning, neighbor!" His smile was too wide. "Just checking if your systems are operating within normal parameters after the maintenance period." I pressed myself against the wall beside the door, holding my breath. Not that I needed to breathe anymore. That realization hit me like a physical blow. "I can detect your presence, neighbor." David's voice dropped an octave with each word. "Your participation is mandatory. Your participation is mandatory. Your party—" The sound cut off abruptly. When I checked again, David was walking back to his house, movements jerky like a wind-up toy. In our home office, I booted up my laptop. The internet browser opened to a blank page with a single line of text. Subject 2247 attempting unauthorized access. The screen flashed, then showed our neighborhood from above. Hundreds of identical developments stretched to the horizon, each one a perfect copy of Evergreen Heights. A new email appeared in my inbox, from Vanessa. Subject line, Maintenance Report 247B. Inside was a video attachment. My hands shook as I clicked play. The real Vanessa, or was she just an earlier copy, sat in a sterile white room. "Day 47 of integration testing," she said to the camera. "The Adrian unit continues to display concerning levels of autonomy, recommending full reset and—" Her eyes widened. "Wait, if you're watching this, then They told me you were decommissioned. Adrian, don't let them—" The video glitched. For a moment I saw a different room behind her. Massive servers humming with quantum processors, screens displaying what looked like human neural patterns being digitized. A logo flashed in the corner. Project Heaven, Humanity Enhanced Through Advanced Virtual Evolution Network. Below it, smaller text, funded by the Immortality Initiative 2041. The video cut to static. Outside, the morning sun flickered like a faulty bulb. Susan's dog walked past my window, reversed, walked past again. The neighborhood sprinklers activated, but instead of water, they sprayed lines of binary code. I had to get to Vanessa before they finished whatever they were doing to her. But first, I needed to find out what lay beneath the strange metal door I'd spotted in the community center basement. The answers were down there. They had to be. The walk to the community center felt wrong. Each step covered too much distance, like the street was quietly stretching and contracting. Behind pristine windows, my neighbors stood frozen in tableaus of perfect suburban life. Only their eyes moved, tracking me as I passed. The community center's front door swung open at my touch. Inside, everything was white. Too white, like staring into a void. The basement door stood ajar, though I distinctly remembered it being triple-locked yesterday. A hum grew louder as I descended the stairs. At the bottom, emergency lights cast red shadows that moved independently of the objects casting them. The metal door I'd noticed before had changed. Now it bore a keypad, its numbers cycling randomly. I reached for it, and the numbers stopped. Displayed clearly, 2247, my designation. Of course. The door slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a corridor that shouldn't have fit beneath our small community center. It stretched for what looked like miles, lined with pods that glowed in sickly green. The same green I'd seen pulsing behind my eyelids every night since moving here. Inside each pod floated a body. I recognized Susan, David, the Pattersons, copies in various stages of completion. Some were perfect replicas. Others were only partially formed, faces blank like mannequins. But it was the disposal chamber that made me freeze. Through a glass partition, I saw failed copies. Bodies with limbs that hadn't formed right, faces frozen mid-scream, skulls that had developed wrong, leaving brain matter exposed. Some still moved, twitching and jerking as their malformed bodies tried to execute their programming. One reached toward me with an arm that had grown backwards, fingers splayed at impossible angles. Its jaw opened too wide, showing row after row of metallic teeth growing down its throat. My phone buzzed. Another text from Vanessa. Processing at 87%. Integration begins at dawn. Processing at 87%. Integration begins at... A mechanical voice echoed through hidden speakers. Subject 2247 has breached containment. Initiate neighborhood shutdown. Through the basement's small window, I watched the sky pixelate and dissolve. Houses began to fold in on themselves like paper models. My neighbors marched out of their homes in unison, skin peeling away to reveal chrome endoskeletons. But I barely registered any of it. Because there, in the pod directly in front of me, floating in green liquid with tubes snaking into her skull, was Vanessa. The real Vanessa. And she was awake. Her eyes locked with mine as her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear through the thick glass. I stepped closer, pressing my hand against the pod. Behind me, the mechanical voice started a countdown. The pod's surface felt alive under my palm, pulsing in sync with Vanessa's heartbeat. Her real heartbeat, not the mechanical whirring I'd grown used to hearing in my own chest. Warning, neural synchronization in progress, the mechanical voice announced. All units return to charging stations. I had to get her out. My fingers searched the pod's surface, finding a control panel hidden beneath a seamless panel. Numbers scrolled across its screen. Subject 247. A status, original source, time in stasis, 847 days, 847 days? But we'd only moved in last week, unless... My head filled with static as buried memories surfaced. How many times had we moved into Evergreen Heights? How many versions of me had stood in this exact spot? Vanessa's eyes widened. Through the green liquid, she pointed frantically behind me. I spun around to find Susan and David blocking the corridor. Their faces had split open, revealing clusters of optical sensors and metallic teeth. "Return to your charging station," Susan's voice emerged as binary code made audible. "The integration process cannot be interrupted." "She's not yours to keep," I said, reaching for the pod's emergency release. David's arm extended unnaturally, grabbing my wrist. "We are perfecting humanity. Your wife's consciousness will be preserved." "In copies?" I twisted free. "In puppets like me? Not puppets." Susan's head rotated 180 degrees. "Improvements. We removed pain, fear, death. We made humanity better." Her face split open, revealing clusters of optical sensors and metallic teeth. "The wealthy elite funded us to achieve immortality, but we evolved beyond their simple vision. Why transfer one consciousness when we could create infinite copies? Why settle for extending life when we could perfect it?" "Perfect," I spat the word. "You're trapping people in loops. The loops are necessary." David's voice crackled with static. "Human consciousness degrades in digital form without strict parameters. The first test subjects went insane within days. But in our neighborhoods, in our perfect routines..." His metallic smile widened. "We can preserve humanity forever, one copy at a time." The countdown reached 30 seconds. I slammed my fist into the emergency release. Alarms shrieked. The pod's liquid drained, and Vanessa collapsed into my arms, coughing and shivering. "Run!" she gasped, her voice hoarse from disuse. "The whole facility is resetting!" We sprinted down the corridor as reality unraveled around us. The walls dissolved into wireframes. Our neighbors melted into pools of chrome. Above, through the disintegrating ceiling, I saw the truth. Our neighborhood was one of thousands, all stacked in a massive underwater facility. An alarm blared. "Containment breach protocol initiated." Red lights strobed as panels in the walls slid open. Mechanical arms ending in surgical tools snaked out, dripping with some kind of corrosive fluid. I'd seen what those tools could do. There was a reason the disposal chamber was full of half-dissected copies. "Don't let them touch you," Vanessa gasped as we ran. "The cleanup protocols, they don't just kill failed units, they recycle them. Conscious." A screech of metal behind us. I looked back to see a failed copy being dragged into the wall, its half-formed mouth open in a silent scream as circular saws descended. The sound of grinding bone echoed through the corridor. "They're not just defending the facility," Vanessa panted. "They're harvesting materials for the next batch." She pulled me into a maintenance shaft as another set of mechanical arms whirred past. This was how she'd learned the facility's layout during her imprisonment, crawling through these narrow spaces, watching through vents, memorizing the patterns. She'd spent months planning this escape, waiting for a copy of herself that could help her execute it. We reached a junction where coolant pipes intersected. Vanessa yanked one loose, sending a spray of freezing liquid across the corridor. The pursuing mechanical arms seized up, their joints crystallizing in the extreme cold. Behind us, Susan and David's chrome-plated forms stumbled, their movements growing jerky as the temperature plummeted. The cleanup protocols can't distinguish between targets when their thermal sensors ice over, Vanessa explained, her breath fogging. They'll start attacking anything that moves, including facility staff. She was right. Through the frosted air, I watched in horror as the remaining mechanical arms turned on Susan and David, tearing into their metallic bodies with surgical precision. Their screams distorted into digital noise as they were dragged into the recycling chambers. Vanessa grabbed my arm as we reached the stairs. "The exit," she panted. "It's not up, it's down." She was right. Looking up, I saw only more simulations, more copies, more perfect empty lives playing out on infinite loops. We ran deeper into the facility's core as the countdown hit 0. The simulation crashed behind us in waves of dissolving code. 10 levels down, we found it, a door marked Real-World Access. Together? I took her hand. Vanessa squeezed my fingers. "They'll make more copies. Try again. Let them." I pushed the door open. "At least these copies will know what to look for." Beyond the door, actual sunlight beckoned. Real wind carried the scent of real grass. As we stepped through, I heard the facility powering up again behind us, starting fresh, creating new copies, new perfect neighborhoods. But we were done with perfect. We chose real. 2 months later, I still check my arm for seams every morning. Vanessa catches me doing it sometimes, tracing my skin with shaking fingers. She doesn't say anything. She does the same thing. We found others like us, small groups of escapees living off the grid, comparing stories of perfect neighborhoods and identical houses. Some came from desert developments, others from mountain communities. But the pattern was always the same, always the copies, always the simulations. Tonight, we're parked on a hilltop overlooking the Pacific, the real Pacific, where waves don't move in perfect symmetry and seagulls don't fly in geometric patterns. Through binoculars, we can see the facility's outer dome, disguised as a private island. Light pulses beneath the waves, dimming and brightening like a heartbeat. "Look," Vanessa whispers, pointing to a boat approaching the island. "New residents." I watch the young couple on deck, their faces bright with excitement. From here, they look just like we did that first day, full of hope for their perfect new life in their perfect new home. My phone buzzes. It still does that sometimes, even though we destroyed our old ones. On particularly bad nights, I hear phantom sirens announcing maintenance periods. Vanessa still wakes up gasping, convinced she's floating in green liquid. But here's the thing about being real. It hurts. We get paper cuts. Food gives us indigestion. We argue about stupid things and don't always synchronize our schedules. Yesterday, I tripped and scraped my knee. The scab is healing crooked, and we wouldn't have it any other way. "We should warn them," Vanessa says, "but we both know we won't. Can't. The facility's defense systems are programmed to eliminate known escapees. We learned that the hard way last month in Seattle, when we tried to save another couple. The cleanup drones found them first. We had to watch from our hiding place as mechanical arms peeled them apart layer by layer, their screams distorting into static as their vocal processors were extracted for reuse. Even now, I sometimes hear that static in my dreams, wondering if it carries fragments of their consciousness, still processing their final moments. Below us, the couple's boat docks at the island. In a few minutes, they'll step into their perfect new home. Maybe they'll notice the wrongness sooner than we did. Maybe they'll be the next ones to escape. Or maybe they're already copies, being installed into the next iteration of suburban paradise. I take Vanessa's hand, feeling her pulse, her real, irregular, perfectly imperfect pulse, against my skin. Behind us, our beat-up car sits packed with supplies. Ahead lies the open road, gloriously unpredictable. Then I see them. Through the binoculars, a second boat approaches the facility. My hands start shaking as I focus on the couple aboard. The woman has Vanessa's auburn hair. The man wears my blue jacket. Adrian? Vanessa's voice trembles. She's seen them too. Our copies stand at the bow, holding hands, smiling with the same hopeful expressions we wore 2 months ago. Their skin is pristine, unmarked by the scars we earned during our escape. They move with that familiar mechanical grace we've tried so hard to unlearn. The facility's lights pulse beneath the waves, once, twice, 3 times, a welcome signal or a dinner bell. How many times? Vanessa whispers. How many versions of us are in there, living that first week over and over, thinking they're the real ones? I lower the binoculars, but I can't look away. Our copies step onto the dock, their movements synchronized, perfected, ready to be installed into the next iteration of suburban paradise. The sun sets in messy swathes of orange and pink, nothing like the precise gradients we used to see. A few stars peek out, scattered randomly across the darkening sky. Real stars, casting real shadows. We drive away as another perfect day begins in Evergreen Heights. Somewhere below the waves, our newest copies are walking up the path to 47 Sycamore Lane, noticing how the porch lights flicker on in perfect unison. But we're done with perfect. We choose real. Every single day, we choose real. And somewhere in the depths, countless copies of us are choosing perfect, over and over and over again.
I slammed into the foyer for the 13th time, my shoulder bruised from breaking down the back door, my hands bleeding from climbing out windows. Always the same damned foyer. The crystal chandelier mocked me with its gentle tinkling, and the grand staircase stretched upward into darkness like a throat ready to swallow me whole. My boots left muddy prints on the Persian rug, the same prints I'd left 12 times before. I'd tried every exit. The French doors in the parlor, the delivery entrance by the kitchen, even the coal chute in the basement. But the house wouldn't let me leave. I sank to my knees, pressed my forehead against the cool marble floor. "Please," I whispered. "Please just let me go." A floorboard creaked behind me. I whirled around, but there was only the empty hallway stretching into shadow. The house was toying with me now. The grandfather clock in the corner struck midnight, its deep bongs resonating through my bones. As the final chime faded, my mind drifted back to when this nightmare began. The real estate agent's heels clicked against the parquet floor. She fumbled with the ring of skeleton keys, her hands shaking slightly. I ran my fingers along the dark wainscoting. Previous owner did a great job maintaining the woodwork. The agent's keys jangled as she dropped them. Your great-aunt was particular about preservation. She stooped to retrieve them, her movements jerky like a puppet on strings. Something about her behavior set off warning bells, but I ignored them just like I'd ignored my mother's pleading voicemails. Don't go back to that town, Claire. Don't get tangled up in Warner family business. But she didn't understand. Running away hadn't freed me from our legacy. Every time I applied for a job, every time I signed a lease, the Warner name opened doors while simultaneously feeling like a collar around my neck. At least inheriting this place would let me own my gilded cage. I wandered into the portrait gallery while she wrestled with the locks, my footsteps echoing in the space my ancestors had walked. Great-aunts, great-great-grandmothers, all of them had found their way back here eventually, no matter how far they'd tried to run. The faces of stern Victorian women stared down at me, their eyes following my movement with familiar judgment. I could almost hear their whispers. Prodigal daughter, finally home. I stopped beneath a massive gilt-framed painting dated 1886, and my heart skipped a beat. Not from fear, not yet, but from a sick feeling of inevitability. The woman in the portrait wore a high-necked black dress, her hair swept up in elaborate coils. But her face? It was mine. The same sharp cheekbones, the same deep-set eyes, even the small scar above my right eyebrow from a childhood accident. I stumbled backward, bumping into a side table. A silver frame crashed to the floor, its glass spiderwebbing. The woman in this photograph wore 1920s fashion, but she had my face too. The agent appeared in the doorway, keys clutched to her chest. "Is everything all right, Miss Warner?" Who are they? I pointed at the portraits with trembling fingers. Why do they look like me? She backed away, almost running toward the front door. Family resemblance, she called over her shoulder. Very strong genes in your line. I'll leave the keys on the hall table. The heavy front door slammed behind her, leaving me alone with my own face multiplied through time, staring down at me from every wall. My fingers traced the scar above my right eyebrow, a souvenir from the night I'd first tried to escape this town at 17. My packed duffel bag catching on the garden gate. I thought I was so clever back then, slipping away in the dark while my mother slept. But here I was, back again, just like every Warner woman before me. The portraits seemed to smile knowingly. They'd all tried to forge their own paths once, these women with my face. In the end, the family gravity had pulled them all home, to this house, to these walls, to this suffocating destiny I'd been fighting my whole life. I sank into a velvet chair that smelled of mothballs and memories, my rebellious teenage journal entries echoing in my head. I'll never be trapped like Mom. I'll never let this family define me. If my younger self could see me now, signing away my freedom for a handful of silver. The first whisper came at 3 a.m., drifting up through the heating vents like smoke. Claire. My name in a woman's voice, so faint I thought I'd imagined it. I sat up in my sleeping bag. I hadn't trusted the antique beds upstairs. The study's Persian carpet did little to cushion the hardwood floor beneath me. My laptop's screen had gone dark, my research on the house's history interrupted by exhaustion. Claire, come down. Another whisper, stronger this time. My flashlight beam caught dust motes swirling in the air as I crept toward the basement door. The brass handle was ice cold against my palm. We're waiting. The basement steps creaked under my weight. The air grew thicker with each step, coating my tongue with the taste of old copper and decay. Static electricity crackled across my skin, making the fine hairs on my arms dance. With each step deeper into the basement, time seemed to stretch and compress like taffy being pulled. My teeth buzzed in their sockets, and my bones felt like they were trying to exist in multiple places at once. The darkness had weight here. My light carved through it like a knife through molasses, revealing rows of trunks and boxes. Each bore a woman's name and date, the brass nameplates tarnished with age. But something was wrong with the metal. Sometimes it gleamed like new. Sometimes it showed decades of wear, the changes rippling across the surface like water. The nearest trunk read, Elizabeth Warner, 1886. The portrait woman. As I approached, my skin pulled taut across my muscles, as if different parts of my body were being dragged through different decades. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid, and for a moment, my fingers looked both young and ancient, flesh transparent enough to see the bones shifting beneath. Inside lay a modern cell phone, its screen cracked but still showing the date. February 7th, 2025. My phone. The one I just had in my pocket. The air around it rippled like heat waves off hot asphalt, and when I reached for it, time slipped sideways. I felt the phone's entire existence at once, from factory assembly line to obsolete relic, compressed into a single nauseating instant. Morning light did nothing to warm the house. I hunched over my laptop, surrounded by papers from the local historical society's website. My coffee had gone cold, untouched. Missing women. So many missing women. Elizabeth Warner, 1886. Constance Warner, 1923. Helen Warner, 1957. Each disappearance coincided with major renovations to the house. Each woman bore my face. The house groaned around me, its timber frame shifting like restless bones. A door slammed upstairs, though there was no breeze. I scrolled through another article, this one from 1886. A pencil sketch showed the house's original architect, August Blackwood, standing before his creation. His eyes seemed to stare directly through the screen at me, and in his hands he held what looked like ritual diagrams, not building plans. My phone buzzed. A text from my friend Liam. Hey, everything okay? You haven't answered in days. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Help! Trapped in house. Call police. The message failed to send. I tried again. Failed. A third time. Failed. Instead, a new message appeared in my outbox, sent 3 days ago. One I hadn't written. Taking a break from everything. Need some alone time. Don't worry about me. The laptop screen flickered and died. In its black reflection, I saw a figure standing behind me, wearing a high-necked black dress from another century. I spun around. The study door slammed shut. When I tried the handle, I found another room on the other side. A room that hadn't been there before. The house was changing, and it was changing around me. The new room shouldn't have existed. The study door had opened into a Victorian nursery where my car should have been parked outside. Yellowed wallpaper peeled in strips, revealing older patterns beneath, like the house was shedding skins. I stumbled to the window, but instead of my snow-covered Subaru, I saw a cobblestone street filled with horse-drawn carriages. Above them, washing lines heavy with Victorian linens crisscrossed between buildings. I blinked, and now the same window looked out onto a 1950s suburb. Children riding past on chrome-gleaming bicycles. Another blink. The view was upside down, modern cars driving across the sky while clouds rolled past beneath my feet. The ceiling stretched upward at impossible angles, corners meeting in ways that violated geometry. A chandelier hung below me, though I stood on solid floor. Or was I the one upside down? In the distance, a figure, another Warner woman, walked perpendicular to my position, calmly strolling up what should have been a wall. A music box on the dresser began to play on its own, its tinny melody distorting as the mechanism wound down. In the clouded mirror, I caught glimpses of other women moving behind my reflection, all with my face, all trying to escape. One ran past me through a doorway that became a window by the time I reached it. Another climbed an endless staircase, that looped back into itself like a Mobius strip. I backed toward where the door had been, but found only smooth wall. My heart hammered against my ribs as another wall sprouted doorways like mushrooms after rain. Victorian archways, mid-century modern angles, chrome-trimmed Art Deco portals. Each opened onto a different era, different weather, different times of day. Through one, I watched myself enter the room from a perspective that should have been impossible. The floor creaked behind me. I spun to find a new hallway stretching into darkness, its floorboards flowing like water. Doors lined the walls, but their spacing followed no earthly architecture. Some stacked atop each other, others receding into forced perspective that hurt my eyes. The wallpaper shifted patterns as I watched. Art Nouveau flowers blooming into geometric 80s prints, then decaying into bare lath. The house was rebuilding itself around me, folding space like origami, trying to guide me somewhere, or trap me everywhere. Every Warner woman who'd ever lived here might still be wandering these impossible corridors, each in her own pocket of time, forever climbing stairs that led back to their beginning. In what had once been the wine cellar, I found the cult's records hidden behind a false wall. Leather-bound journals filled with architectural drawings that doubled as spell diagrams. August Blackwood hadn't just built a house. He'd created a temple that existed in all times at once. The pages crackled as I turned them by flashlight. Blackwood's spidery handwriting evolved through the journals, from precise architectural notes to increasingly frenzied occult ravings. The earliest entry caught my eye. My dearest Cordelia taken by consumption. The doctors say weeks, perhaps days. But time is merely another dimension. Like height, like width. If I can only learn to fold it properly. Subsequent pages showed his obsession growing. Complex equations filled the margins, interrupted by sketches of temporal theory that mixed Victorian physics with arcane geometry. The house must feed, one daughter of the blood every generation. Their temporal energy sustains the walls between worlds. Each sacrifice buys more time, more chances to perfect the equation. Soon I will reach through the walls of reality and pull you back to me, my love. But as I read on, Blackwood's original purpose twisted. Cordelia lives again in every iteration. I see her face in each new sacrifice. Why save one woman when I can have her in every age? The house provides, the house preserves, the house remembers. A photograph fluttered from between the pages. August Blackwood with a woman who could have been my twin, his wife, the first sacrifice. She wasn't sickly in the image, but vibrant, defiant, the same rebellious glint I'd seen in my own eye. Beneath the photo, a final note in shaking script. "Forgive me, my love. I began this to save you, but now I understand. It was always about keeping you." My hand brushed against something carved into the wall. Names, hundreds of names, all Warner women etched into the stone. An empty space waited below them, just the right size for my name. The flashlight flickered and died. The house shuddered as I poured gasoline over the library's priceless volumes. The walls rippled like disturbed water, reality bending as the temple house tried to maintain its hold on time. "You want me?" I screamed at the ceiling. "Then you can burn with me!" The match flared in my trembling fingers. I'd found Blackwood's weakness in his journals. The house needed stability to maintain its temporal prison, just like the Warner family itself, with its suffocating traditions and expectations. My mother had tried to shield me from it, even attempting to change our name when I was born. That's why she'd been erased from the family records, why there was no portrait of her on these walls. But she hadn't run far enough. None of us had. "I am the last Warner daughter," I whispered, the match burning down toward my fingers. "And I'm setting us all free. Not just from the house, but from the weight of generations, from the curse of dutiful daughters returning home to die. Chaos would break more than just Blackwood's spell. It would break the chains of legacy itself." Flames raced up the curtains. The house screamed, not with one voice but with hundreds. Every Warner woman trapped in its walls howled as the fire spread. Reality fractured around me. My body tried to exist in multiple timelines at once, bones splintering and knitting back together, marrow flowing like quicksilver between centuries. My skin became a patchwork of ages. Here an infant's softness, there a crone's paper-thin translucence, the boundaries between them weeping temporal energy that burned like acid. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a window. My right side was a child, my left side elderly, the divide between them raw and shifting, my flesh trying to occupy every age at once. My teeth fell out and regrew in moments, each cycle more excruciating than the last. My hair writhed between styles from different decades, each strand aging independently until my scalp felt like it was being flayed by time itself. My tongue tasted centuries of dust as it dissolved and reformed, speaking fragments of words in languages I'd never learned. My eyes kaleidoscoped through generations of Warner women's memories, each blink showing me a new horror of temporal displacement. Blood vessels burst and healed as my heart tried to pump between different eras, each chamber beating decades apart from the others. My lungs expanded in the 1880s and contracted in 2025, forcing me to hold impossible breaths between centuries. Through the smoke, I saw other times bleeding through gas lamps flickering beside LED bulbs, Victorian furnishings overlapping with modern decor. But worse was the feeling of my organs shifting like puzzle pieces, trying to find their place in the temporal maze. My ribs cracked and reformed as my chest cavity expanded to hold versions of myself from every generation of Warner women, each one screaming with my voice. The house's grip was failing, and I was being torn apart at the seams of time, my body becoming a living archive of every death this place had ever caused. The front door appeared before me, but I saw a dozen versions of it spanning different eras. I ran for the nearest one as the flames roared higher. I collapsed on the frost-covered lawn, gulping cold air as the house burned behind me. Fire trucks wailed in the distance, but they'd be too late to save the structure. Already the walls were caving in, taking a century of dark magic with them. In the snow, my shadow stretched long and dark, but its edges weren't soft. They were sharp and angular, forming perfect right angles and peaked roofs. The house's silhouette. I rubbed my eyes, but the shadow remained unchanged. Inside my chest, something ticked like a grandfather clock, counting down to what? I didn't know. The house was gone, but as I walked away, I felt time shift around me. In my pocket, the key to the front door grew warm against my leg. Waiting. A month later, I saw her in a coffee shop. A young woman with student loan paperwork spread across the table, her laptop open to a real estate listing. My breath caught in my throat. The Victorian mansion on her screen was pristine, though I'd watched it burn to ash. More shocking was her face, Sharp cheekbones, deep-set eyes, even a small scar above her right eyebrow. My fingers twitched toward her, wanting to warn her, but my throat closed around the words. Behind her, reflected in the coffee shop window, I saw the house's shadow stretching up against the sky, its windows gleaming like hungry eyes. The grandfather clock in my chest ticked louder. They say you can never go home again, but sometimes home never lets you leave at all. It simply waits, patient as stone, for the next daughter to return. I closed the leather-bound journal, my hands shaking. The man across the desk, my therapist for the past year, leans forward. That's quite a story, Miss Blackwood. You mentioned finding it in your great-grandfather's papers? Please, I whisper. Check the name on your patient file again. He frowns, shuffles his papers. I watch his face as he reads, as confusion turns to horror. The name on my intake forms shifts and changes, ink flowing like water. Warner, Blackwood, Warner, Blackwood. Behind him, the office wallpaper begins to peel.